Nitric oxide, firstly, I want to remind everyone, is not a gas. I mean, it's not a liquid or a solid, but rather it's a gas. It's a gaseous substance that only lasts for a few seconds. It's very unstable. This is what made it so difficult to find in the human body, and that's why the discovery came so late in the 1980s. And so essentially, what I discovered was that our bodies produce this molecule of nitric oxide. What we discovered was that our arteries, our endothelial cells that line the arteries, actually make this nitric oxide. And what nitric oxide does is phenomenal. It's a vasodilator, which means it widens the arteries. And when it does that, it lowers the blood pressure. It improves blood flow to different organs because you're dilating the arteries. And in addition, this nitric oxide can keep the inner lining of the arteries healthy so that blood does not clot when it's not supposed to in the arteries. Also, it prevents cholesterol plaques from depositing in the arteries. So as long as you keep making nitric oxide in those endothelial cells, it will keep your vascular system very healthy. The way it forms is that when a bolt of lightning zaps through the air, it causes a chemical reaction between nitrogen and oxygen. That's N and O to form NO. That's nitric oxide, and it remains a gas in the atmosphere. Now, nitric oxide itself, we've learned, is not the dangerous aspect, is not the dangerous gas in the atmosphere. What is dangerous is that nitric oxide, being very unstable, reacts with oxygen in the air to form nitrogen dioxide, or NO2. Another name for that is acid rain. That's is what's toxic, of course, will kill you. Why did some people get these diseases and some not? So after taking a lot of courses and getting into college, I came up with my own idea, which was not based on any scientific evidence whatsoever. I just thought maybe, just maybe, our bodies produce a molecule that protects us against cardiovascular disease. Some of us make a lot of this molecule, some of us don't. And those who do not make sufficient quantities of this molecule might develop cardiovascular disease. I found that molecule, which is nitric oxide. When we discovered that the body produces nitric oxide, we did not understand the mechanism. We knew the body produced it, but we didn't know how. And then but mainly other investigators, found that nitric oxide is made by an enzymatic reaction in the body. It's very simple. We eat protein. Proteins are digested to amino acids, and each of the 20 amino acids has a different function in the body. But we have one amino acid called arginine, which is extremely important because arginine is what this enzyme uses to make nitric oxide. The enzyme is very appropriately called NO synthase. Okay, so the NO synthase binds arginine, which has a lot of nitrogens on it, and it takes one of them off and it makes it into nitric oxide. So our body uses enzymes, one enzyme, to make nitric oxide. And once that was discovered, then it was really easy to ski down the slopes to figure out how we could make more nitric oxide to keep us healthy. What are the problems associated with inadequate nitric oxide? If you block the production of nitric oxide, you can get a stroke because you get blood clotting occurring unnaturally in the brain. You get a heart attack. If you have inadequate NO, we know now, based on another discovery we made in the early 90s, that males will develop impotence or erectile dysfunction. The most important functions we know about NO in the brain is that the nitric oxide promotes learning, memory recall, recalling information in the memory, and also just you remembering facts and so on. The brain has more nitric oxide in it than does the rest of the body. And we don't really know why. All we know is that NO in the brain promotes memory recall, learning, and so on. But there's got to be more functions. I think NO is important in the brain to dilate all the blood vessels, to keep the blood circulating in the brain, to keep the delivery of oxygen and nutrients going to the brain. And when you dilate arteries, you also promote the removal or washout of metabolites that can injure the brain, just like they would in your muscles when you're working. And so I personally believe that the nitric oxide is one of the most important signaling molecules in the brain. Another thing one would see as the nitric oxide decreases as you get older is the development of type 2 diabetes. And of course, let's keep in mind that men with type 2 diabetes, almost 95% of them get erectile dysfunction. And that's because of the decrease and the inadequate amounts of nitric oxide. Erectile dysfunction is the first sign of a nitric oxide problem. And therefore, that nitric oxide problem is going to develop in other places. For 20 years, he's used inhaled nitric oxide to administer to newborns. Many thousands a year, many newborns are born with a problem in the lungs. What my friend discovered is that if he gave small amounts of nitric oxide by inhalation into the lungs, right before your eyes, and I've seen it and it brought tears to my eyes, these blue babies turn pink and they are cured from this terrible pulmonary hypertension. They're cured, and in a couple of days, mom and dad could take the babies home, and the condition is cured. It's just, it's one of the reasons why I call nitric oxide the miracle molecule. I mean, I really, really believe it. So, to make a long story short, okay, so we have inhaled nitric oxide. We've had it for years. We have COVID-19 comes along. An experiment was tried in, I think, 2004 or something, where we had a related coronavirus infection that didn't spread too much. Some patients were given inhaled nitric oxide, and it seemed to work. Those patients felt better, and they went home. So now, when this epidemic hit, 5 large clinical trials were started with nitric oxide, and the results are almost in. Some of the data has leaked out already, and it's clear that nitric oxide is very effective in treating patients with severe COVID-19. And the 3 main reasons, I'll make it real quick. I mentioned those reasons before. First, let me say that what kills patients with COVID-19 is massive inflammation of the lungs, massive blood clotting. That's called thrombosis. That kills the patients. In examining the lungs from these patients, it was shown that the endothelium in the blood vessels was destroyed. What does that mean? That means they're not making nitric oxide. What happens if you don't make nitric oxide? You get vasoconstriction, no blood flow to the lungs. You get bronchoconstriction, no air into the lungs. And you lose the ability of an NO to kill the virus. Remember, NO kills viruses. So for all those 3 reasons, and because NO goes down, patients die. Now, by taking the inhaled nitric oxide, you restore everything. The thrombosis fairly rapidly disappears. These patients can breathe again. They come out of the ICU, and in a couple of weeks, they go home. Science is 10% fact and 90% common sense. Think about that for a second. Okay, so we're exercising. Makes no difference whether you're swimming, weightlifting, volleyball, running, bicycling, whatever. You're moving. When you exercise, your cardiac output, of course, goes up. Your heart stimulated, faster heart rate, faster force of contraction. Your cardiac output goes up. More blood flows throughout your body. What is so unique about the arteries is that when blood flows through the arteries, it creates a force on those endothelial cells. Just imagine water going high pressure through a hose. That force stimulates this enzyme NO synthase to make lots of NO. Lots of NO. Why? Here comes the logical part. Well, don't you want to increase blood flow to your working muscles? So NO is a vasodilator. Widens the blood vessels, more blood flows through. Why do you want more blood to flow through? Well, blood has oxygen bound to the hemoglobin. Blood has nutrients. You're eating, whatever, you have nutrients. You want to deliver all of that to the working muscles. In addition, when your muscles are working, they make metabolites like lactic acid that can be very painful. So by improving blood flow, you're also washing out the blood from the other end of the muscles. You're removing the lactic acid. So that is why exercise generates nitric oxide for the physiological purpose of improving your performance and endurance. But I want everyone to keep in mind that that same nitric oxide that's dilating your vessels is going throughout your body, keeping you healthy, to your brain, to your heart. This is why for 5,000 years, people have been saying that exercise is good for your health. Nobody knew why until about 20 years ago. So at least one explanation for that is nitric oxide.